The environmental controls in Habitat Dome 7 had been malfunctioning for 3 days straight, and the temperature readings were climbing past anything considered comfortable for most species. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his brow as he made his rounds through the diplomatic quarters, checking on the various ambassadors and delegates housed in the multi-species peace compound. The facility had been humanity's greatest achievement in interstellar diplomacy, a neutral ground where 12 different species could meet, negotiate, and hopefully prevent the kind of conflicts that had plagued the outer colonies for decades. As the senior human liaison officer, Jake had seen his share of cultural mishaps and misunderstandings, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that greeted him outside Ambassador Tvala's quarters. The Kyari diplomat was pressed against the corridor wall, her normally pristine ceremonial robes darkened with perspiration. Her pale blue skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, and her vibrant red curls were plastered to her skull. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, her usual regal composure completely abandoned. Ambassador. Jake approached cautiously. The Kyari were known for their pride and formality, showing weakness was considered deeply shameful in their culture. Are you experiencing difficulties with the environmental systems? Tvala's golden eyes fixed on him with what might have been relief, though her voice remained steady despite her obvious distress. Lieutenant Commander Morrison. I am managing the current atmospheric conditions adequately. Even in her compromised state, she maintained the elaborate speech patterns that marked her as nobility among her people. Jake had been working with her for 6 months, and he'd learned to read between the lines of Kyari diplomatic speak. Managing adequately meant she was suffering but would rather collapse than admit it. The cooling system should be restored within the next few hours, he offered, though privately he wondered if she'd last that long. The Kyari homeworld was a frigid place where water existed primarily as ice. Their physiology wasn't designed for the tropical conditions that had taken over the compound. I shall endure, she replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her heavy ceremonial sash. Jake found himself studying her face, something he'd never really done before. Beneath the formal mask and the obvious discomfort, there was something almost vulnerable about her expression. He'd always found her attractive in an otherworldly way, but seeing her like this stirred something protective in him. You know, he said carefully, there's a recreational pool in the central courtyard. It's not being used during the heat advisory. The water's kept quite cool. Tvala went very still. Water? For swimming. Cooling off. It might help with the temperature. He paused, noticing her strange reaction. Unless that's not something your people do. For a long moment, she didn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Water immersion is significant among my people. It is not undertaken lightly. Jake felt like he was missing something important, but Tvala's condition was worsening by the minute. Her breathing had become more labored, and there was a slight tremor in her hands that spoke of heat exhaustion. Would it help? He asked simply. Another pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Come on then, he said, offering his arm for support. Let's get you cooled down before you collapse on my watch. As they walked toward the courtyard, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just crossed some invisible line, though he had no idea what lay on the other side. The courtyard pool sparkled under the dome's artificial sunlight, its surface creating rippling patterns of light that danced across the surrounding walls. Jake had grabbed a couple of towels from the recreation center, and now he stood awkwardly by the pool's edge as Tvala stared at the water with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. I should give you privacy, he said, turning away as she began to unfasten the ornate clasps of her ceremonial outer robe. Wait. Her voice stopped him mid-turn. In Kyari tradition, water ceremonies are not conducted alone. A witness is required. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the environmental malfunction. A witness? You need not observe directly, she said, and he could hear the rustle of fabric behind him. But you must remain present. It is proper. He nodded, keeping his back turned as he heard her step into the water. The sharp intake of breath that followed made him tense. "Too cold?" he asked. "No," came her breathless reply. "It is, perfect." For several minutes, there was only the gentle sound of water lapping against the pool's edges. Jake found himself acutely aware of every small splash, every soft movement behind him. The formal, untouchable ambassador he'd known for months was experiencing something that clearly held deep meaning for her people. "I had forgotten," Tvala's voice came closer now, and he could tell she was moving deeper into the pool. "The way water embraces the body. How it supports without judgment. You can swim?" Jake asked, surprised. "All Kyari learn in youth, but we abandon the practice upon reaching maturity. Water becomes sacred. Reserved for the most important moments of our lives." The splashing grew more confident, and despite his best intentions, Jake found himself stealing glances over his shoulder. Tvala had shed her heavy robes and was moving through the water with surprising grace. Her pale blue skin seemed to glow beneath the surface, and her red hair floated around her like liquid fire. She noticed his glance and didn't look away. Instead, she smiled, the first genuine smile he'd ever seen from her. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger, more alive. "This is extraordinary," she breathed, floating on her back and staring up at the domed ceiling. "I feel free." Jake found his own tension melting away as he watched her rediscover something she'd clearly loved and lost. "You're a natural swimmer. My people believe water remembers," she said, rolling over to face him. "That it holds the memory of every person who has entered it. Perhaps it remembers my younger self." She swam closer to the pool's edge where he sat, her movements becoming more playful. There was something almost intoxicating about seeing this formal, reserved diplomat letting go of her careful control. "Thank you," she said, floating just an arm's length away. "For this gift." "It's just a pool," Jake replied, but his voice had grown husky. "No." Tvala's golden eyes held his with startling intensity. "It is much more than that." She moved closer, and Jake became acutely aware of how the water made her skin glisten, how her hair created a crimson halo around her face. The air between them seemed charged with something electric. "Jake," she said, using his first name for the first time since they'd met. "Do you understand what you have offered me?" Before he could answer, she reached out and touched his hand. Her skin was cool from the water but somehow burning where it met his. "Among my people, sharing sacred waters is." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It is how we signal our intent to bond. To choose a mate." Jake's heart stopped. "Tvala, I didn't know." And watching over someone during their water ceremony, she continued, her voice soft but certain, "means you accept their choice. That you wish to be chosen in return." The water lapped gently around them as Jake stared into her eyes, seeing not the cold diplomat but a woman who had just bared her soul, and her culture's most sacred tradition. "I choose you, Jake Morrison," she whispered, her hand tightening on his. "And I believe, you have chosen me as well." The implications crashed over him like a wave, but looking into her hopeful, vulnerable expression, Jake found he couldn't bring himself to explain the misunderstanding. Not when she looked at him like he was the answer to something she'd been searching for her entire life. The next morning brought more than just repaired environmental controls, it brought chaos. Jake woke to his communicator buzzing insistently with messages from the compound's administrative staff, and his stomach dropped when he saw the subject lines. "Urgent, Cultural Protocol Breach, Habitat 7. Request, Immediate Meeting, Ambassador Relations. Priority, Kyari Delegation Response Required." Apparently, news of Tvala's water ceremony had spread through the diplomatic quarters faster than a plasma leak. Jake threw on his uniform and rushed to the Central Administrative Building, where he found Director Helena Voss waiting with an expression that could have frozen stellar plasma. "Sit down, Morrison," she said without preamble. "We need to discuss your recreational activities with Ambassador Tvala." "Director, I can explain." "Can you?" Voss pulled up a holographic display showing what appeared to be official Kyari diplomatic correspondence. Because according to this message from the Kyari High Council, you're now formally engaged to one of their most prominent ambassadors. They're requesting details about the betrothal ceremony and asking when we plan to announce the union to the Galactic Assembly. Jake's mouth went dry. They think we're engaged. Tvala filed the appropriate cultural documentation this morning. Water bonding ceremony, witnessed by the chosen mate, formal acceptance recorded. Voss fixed him with a steely stare. Did you or did you not participate in some kind of Kyari mating ritual? Before Jake could formulate an answer, the conference room doors slid open and Tvala entered, looking every inch the regal diplomat once again. Her ceremonial robes were perfectly arranged, her red hair styled in an elaborate pattern that Jake now realized probably signified her new, bonded, status. Director Voss, Tvala inclined her head formally. I trust my mate has explained the circumstances of our bonding. Voss looked between them like she was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Ambassador, there seems to be some confusion about Lieutenant Commander Morrison's intentions. Tvala's golden eyes found Jake's across the room, and he saw something flicker there, uncertainty, perhaps even hurt. Confusion. I think, Jake said carefully, standing up, we need to discuss this privately. The entire diplomatic corps is talking about it, Voss interjected. The Centauri delegation is placing bets on the wedding date. The Andorian ambassador asked if he should prepare a ceremonial gift. This isn't something we can handle privately anymore. Tvala's composure remained perfect, but Jake had learned to read her subtle expressions. The slight tightening around her eyes spoke of humiliation being carefully contained. Perhaps, Tvala said with crystalline politeness, my mate requires time to adjust to our new circumstances. Humans, I understand, have different courtship timelines. Tvala, Jake started. I have prepared quarters suitable for a bonded pair, she continued, her voice growing more formal with each word. And I have begun learning human customs that might please you. I spent the night researching human bonding rituals. Did you know that your species exchanges metal circles as symbols of commitment? The hope in her voice, carefully hidden beneath diplomatic protocol, made Jake's chest tighten. Director Voss was looking at him expectantly, waiting for him to clarify the misunderstanding and resolve the diplomatic incident. But as Jake met Tvala's eyes, he found himself remembering the way she'd looked in the pool, free, joyful, vulnerable. The way she'd touched his hand and chosen him with such quiet certainty. Actually, he heard himself saying, I'd like to see those quarters. Voss's eyebrows shot up. Morrison. The compound regulations allow for interspecies relationships among staff, Jake continued, his voice growing stronger as he made his decision. As long as they don't interfere with diplomatic functions. Tvala's careful mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a smile that made his heart race. You're seriously considering this? Voss asked incredulously. I'm considering, Jake said, moving closer to Tvala, that maybe some misunderstandings are worth exploring. He offered Tvala his arm in what he hoped was a diplomatic gesture, and her face lit up as she took it. Director, Tvala said with renewed confidence, I assure you that our bonding will only strengthen human-Kyari relations. Perhaps you would like to discuss the ceremonial requirements for a proper announcement. As they left Voss sputtering behind them, Jake wondered what exactly he'd just committed himself to. But with Tvala's hand warm on his arm and her genuine happiness radiating beside him, he found he was looking forward to finding out. So, he said quietly as they walked toward the residential sector, tell me about these quarters you've prepared. Her smile could have powered the entire compound. Tvala's quarters had been transformed into something that defied easy description. Jake stood in the doorway, taking in the careful blend of human and Kyari elements, soft lighting that mimicked both Earth's sunset and her homeworld's aurora, furniture that accommodated both their physiologies, and in the center of the room, a small decorative fountain that created the gentle sound of flowing water. I researched human domestic preferences, Tvala said, suddenly seeming uncertain. But I may have misunderstood some concepts. The human database suggested that mood lighting and water features were important for bonded pairs. Jake found himself smiling at her earnest attempt to bridge their cultures. It's beautiful, Tvala. Really? She moved to adjust something on a side table, a collection of what appeared to be small crystals arranged in a pattern. Her usual confident demeanor had given way to something more vulnerable, and Jake realized she was nervous. These are Kyaritel, she explained, noticing his interest. Memory stones. Each one holds a significant moment from my life. She picked up a pale blue crystal. This one contains my first glimpse of snow on my homeworld. This one. She selected a deeper blue stone, my first diplomatic success. And this one? Jake asked, pointing to a crystal that seemed to shimmer with inner light. Tvala's cheeks darkened slightly, the Kyari equivalent of a blush. Yesterday. In the pool. The moment I realized what I felt for you was more than diplomatic courtesy. The honesty in her voice made something tighten in Jake's chest. He reached out, touching the crystal gently. Tvala, I need you to understand something. When I offered you the pool, I didn't know about the cultural significance. I was just trying to help you cool down. She went very still. I see. But, Jake continued quickly, moving closer to her, that doesn't mean my feelings aren't real. Her golden eyes searched his face. Your feelings? I've been attracted to you for months, he admitted. But you were so formal, so untouchable. I never imagined you might feel the same way. Tvala set down the memory crystal and turned to face him fully. Among my people, showing interest too openly is considered improper. Especially for someone of my station. I am expected to be chosen, not to choose. But you chose me, Jake said softly. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. In the water, I felt something I had never experienced. Not just the physical sensation, but freedom. Permission to want something for myself instead of for my people or my position. Jake reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the elegant line of her cheekbone. Her skin was silk soft and cool, but it warmed under his touch. I want to understand your culture, he said. I want to do this right. Tvala leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. And I want to understand yours. I have been studying human courtship rituals, but they seem complex. There are so many stages, so many unspoken rules. Jake laughed softly. Maybe we can create our own rules. She opened her eyes, studying his face with that intense focus he'd come to recognize. In my culture, bonded pairs share their deepest truths. Their fears, their desires, their most cherished memories. Then tell me, Jake said, his hand sliding down to cup her neck. Tell me your deepest truth. Tvala was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice held a tremor he'd never heard before. I have spent my entire life being what others needed me to be. The perfect daughter, the ideal diplomat, the untouchable ambassador. But with you. I want to be just Tvala. Just a woman who laughs in swimming pools and chooses her own path. The vulnerability in her confession made Jake's heart ache. Without thinking, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when she responded by pulling him closer, it deepened into something that spoke of months of suppressed attraction and newfound freedom. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. My deepest truth, Jake whispered against her lips, is that I've been falling for you since the first time you put me in my place during a diplomatic briefing. You're brilliant and fierce and beautiful, and I want to spend every day learning new things about you. Tvala's smile was radiant. Then we are well matched, Jake Morrison. Because I intend to spend considerable time teaching you. As she led him toward the human Kyari fusion of a bed she'd arranged, Jake realized that some of the best relationships began with misunderstandings, as long as both people were willing to work toward real understanding. Outside, the compound's artificial night was falling, but inside Tvala's quarters, something entirely new was beginning to bloom. 3 months later, Jake stood before the Galactic Assembly's Ceremonial Council, wearing a formal uniform that had been modified to incorporate Kyari design elements. Beside him, Tvala was resplendent in robes that blended the ceremonial traditions of both their peoples. The flowing lines of human formal were merged with the intricate patterns that marked her as Kyari nobility. The bonding of Ambassador Tvala of Kyre and Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison of Earth, announced the Assembly's speaker, represents more than a union between two individuals. It symbolizes the growing cooperation between our species. What the Assembly didn't know was how much negotiation had gone into making this moment possible. The past months had been a whirlwind of cultural exchange, heated discussions, and diplomatic maneuvering that had tested both their relationship and their respective governments' patience. "You realize," Jake murmured to Tvala as they waited for their cue to speak, "your High Council still thinks I'm some kind of water shaman." Tvala's lips curved in the subtle smile that had become his favorite expression of hers. "And your superiors believe I've somehow hypnotized you with alien pheromones. We make an excellently scandalous pair." The truth was more complex and more beautiful than either government wanted to acknowledge. Their relationship had become a bridge between worlds, forcing both species to examine their assumptions about love, commitment, and cultural exchange. When their turn came to address the Assembly, Tvala stepped forward with the grace that had made her one of Kyre's most effective diplomats. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "this union began with a misunderstanding. My mate offered me water in kindness, not knowing its significance to my people. I interpreted his gesture through the lens of my own culture, not his." Jake took her hand as she continued, "But in working to understand each other's true intentions, we discovered something profound. Love, it seems, transcends the boundaries we place around it. The Kyari believe that water holds memory," Jake added, his voice strong despite the magnitude of the moment. "And humans believe that the best relationships are built on understanding and choice. We've learned that both can be true." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything the Assembly had seen, a careful blend of human vows and Kyari water rituals, performed before representatives of a dozen species. When Jake and Tvala shared their final kiss as a bonded pair, the chamber erupted in applause that transcended species barriers. Later, at the reception, Director Voss approached them with what might have been pride on her usually stern face. "I have to admit," she said, raising her glass in a toast, "when this started, I thought it would be a diplomatic disaster. Instead, you've managed to create the most successful interspecies cultural exchange program we've ever had." It was true. Their relationship had sparked interest from other mixed couples throughout the compound, leading to formal programs for navigating interspecies relationships. The swimming pool had become a popular gathering spot for diplomats from water-loving species, and the Kyari had begun offering cultural workshops on their bonding traditions. "Director," Tvala said with a mischievous glint in her golden eyes, "I believe several other species have expressed interest in learning about human recreational water activities. Perhaps we should install additional pools." Voss looked alarmed. "Please tell me we're not going to have a dozen diplomatic incidents involving swimming." "Only if we're very lucky," Jake grinned, pulling Tvala closer. As the evening wound down, they found themselves alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars that held both their homeworlds. Tvala had changed into a simpler dress that moved like water around her curves, and Jake had shed his formal jacket for the comfortable shirt she'd given him, one that incorporated Kyari patterns in its weaving. "Do you ever regret it?" Tvala asked quietly. "The misunderstanding that started all this?" Jake considered the question, thinking about the chain of events that had led them here, the broken environmental controls, his simple offer of a pool, her cultural interpretation, and everything that had followed. "Never," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places." Tvala leaned back against his chest, and Jake could feel her contentment in the relaxed line of her body. "My people have a saying," she murmured. "The deepest waters often begin with a single drop." "And humans say that still waters run deep," Jake replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then we are well matched," Tvala smiled, turning in his arms. "A drop in depths," creating something entirely new. As they kissed under the artificial stars, Jake reflected on how their accidental beginning had become something neither of their cultures had words for, but something that felt like the start of everything they'd both been searching for without knowing it. In the end, the best misunderstandings were the ones that led to perfect understanding.